this tutorial, we'll be looking at 5 basic sketching techniques. Click on the link in the description below and we'll email the worksheet to you so we can work through it together. Let's get started. For this video, you will need a pencil. I'm using a 4B pencil and an HB. Pencils that have B in it are darker and usually easier to shade with, but any pencil will do for this tutorial. You also need an eraser for mistakes or lightening. When you're sketching, there's 5 basic techniques that you can use. There are a few different names for them. Let's start with the hatching. So hatching is just lots of short straight lines that are parallel to each other. Hatching works well if you want to draw a texture like feathers or hair. So for this tutorial, we're going to start with really dark lines, pressing quite hard and making the lines close together. If you want to make the hatching lighter, you will need to press lighter and move your lines a little bit further apart. So as you can see, I'm leaving bigger spaces and I'm putting less pressure on the page. I'm doing this with a 4B. The B pencils are nice and smooth, so it makes it much easier. It's just lots of little lines. When you're doing it, practice shading from your dark to your light and try not to make just make it suddenly light. You need to make it slowly light, so slowly pressing lighter and making those lines further apart. If you are left-handed, you might want to start on the other side of the page because your hand can sometimes smudge the pencil, so it's easier to work with your hand pressing on places that you haven't drawn yet. Right, the next technique we're looking at is cross-hatching. So when you're cross-hatching, it's similar to hatching, except you would be going at 90-degree angles. The lines will be at 90-degree angles to each other, drawing them in 2 directions. Again, when you want the shading to be dark, you'll draw the lines close together and press hard with your pencil, and as you're making them lighter, you will press lighter and move the lines further apart. Focus on doing this slowly so that you slowly get lighter shading. Don't worry too much about getting going out of the lines. Focus more on the technique and getting it to gradually become lighter and lighter. So here, if I'm looking at this, there's a big jump between the dark and the light here. If I was shading this in a picture, I would want to work in that area a little bit more. So this type of shading is really good if you want to draw something rough like a tree trunk or show some netting on a dress or fishing nets. Texture that it creates is good for those things. Right, the third shading technique we're looking at is blending. Now this is a really smooth type of shading. When you're done, you don't really want to see any pencil lines, and this is obviously for things that are really smooth. It's very tricky to do this with an HB pencil. You need to be using a pencil like at least a B, because the HB makes hard lines. They're hard pencils, that's what the H stands for. And then you can't blend those lines out. So as you can see, I'm just pressing really lightly. Even to get the dark tones, you press lightly and do 2 or 3 layers of shading. And you can just use your finger like I am, or if you'd like, you can also use a piece of tissue. You can see just a little bit of drawing goes a long way here. I've shaded it all the way till that end, and I haven't put any pencil on that side of the page. Don't go too dark in the beginning, and then you can't blend it out. Rather do lots of lighter layers on top of each other. So let's say I did do it a bit too dark, so I did some shading here and it's too dark. All you need to do is take your eraser, rub it out. Because B pencils are very soft and you haven't been pressing hard, the eraser takes it right off the page, you can't see it anymore. And then you can just build your shading up again. Let's give scribbling a try now. Now scribbling is pretty much what it sounds like. You're just scribbling the pencil all over the page, and it works really well if you want to draw bushes or foliage or trees that are in the distance. It works really, really well for that. It is just literally scribbling. I like to always start with the darker shading and work my way to the lighter shading. Even when I'm drawing a picture, I find it easier, but some people do prefer to work from the light to the dark. So you can see I'm just moving my pencil in a lot of different directions and slowly pressing lighter and lighter and drawing my lines further and further apart. Right, this last one, stippling, it's actually a really time-consuming drawing technique, but it looks great for a texture like beach sand or rocks when you want to get those little speckle marks on a rock. You don't have to do the whole block for this because it will take forever, but stippling is just hitting your pencil on the page. Obviously, when you want it darker, you have to press really hard. And you can press lighter and make them further apart. So shading from dark to light is actually really easy. It's just about how much pressure you put on the page and how far apart you make your pencil marks. So here I'm pressing lighter, making them further apart. It doesn't have to be a perfect dot, so if it has a little flick on it, it gives a little bit of character when you're doing stippling. Right, and those are our 5 basic sketching techniques. What we'll be doing next is looking at how we can shade in a shape using these different techniques. Where to put the light and where to put the dark. Something to consider when you're drawing is how you hold your pencil. So if you hold your pencil facing directly down on the page, it can make quite a hard line, which is not very easy to blend. So you need to make sure that you hold your pencil a little higher up the shaft and press on the side. This makes it gentler and much easier to blend and shade the lines. The next thing that you need to consider is the shape of the object. So what we did in the previous page was we just went from dark to light, but you can't take an object like a circle and just go from dark to light. What you have to do is account for the shape of this object. So if we're doing a circle, our shading should follow the outline of the shape. So you can see I did dark shading around this edge and it's almost a C shape, and got lighter and lighter and this point here is the lightest point. Again, it's staying in this circle kind of a shape. It makes it look more three-dimensional, so you can see this shape looks a lot more flat, whereas this one is more three-dimensional because we followed the outline of the shape. Okay, this is a very simple trick to make your pictures look realistic. The next step is to think about where the light is going to be. So in these two pictures here, the light is coming from the right-hand side. If we did, say, this one here is the light source, so it will be hitting this object over here. That means this lightest area will be on top, the top right-hand corner, and your darkest area will be on the other side, and the shadow will be cast on the other side of the light. When you're doing a three-dimensional object, even though this part here is closest to the light, you need to do a little bit of dark shading to show that that object curves around. It sets it back a little bit and makes this part pop out, so it makes it look more three-dimensional. For the cylinder here, the light would be coming from the opposite direction, from the left-hand side. And again, the parts of the shape that's furthest away from the light source will be your darkest, and then working it to your lightest shape. I followed the outline of the cylinder to shade it in, and then again, closest to the light source, just do a little bit of dark shading to make it look more three-dimensional. And the shadow is cast on the right-hand side. Right, so we've got three objects here at the bottom that you are going to practice shading. Firstly, remember, use the shape of the object, and secondly, consider the light source. So if we're looking at this oval here, the light's going to be hitting it from the top right-hand side. So over here is going to be our darkest part. I'm just drawing a little plan for myself. Remember, even right against the edge of the shape, it's going to be dark. And our lightest part will be over here. I found that when I'm shading, I turn the page to suit my hand. So always make sure your hand feels comfortable. Some students will sit with their page perfectly straight on their desk and put their hand at funny angles to try and shade it in, and then they don't shade or draw as well as they could. Move the page so that your hand is comfortable. Right, so I like to start with the dark, but you can start lighter if you want. Start with these darkest parts on the opposite side of the light, going around. You can use whichever shading technique you like. I'm going to use a hatching technique. So hatching is just lots of little lines, if you remember correctly. And I'm following the shape that's laid out, the oval. Doing a little bit of dark shading around the edge there. Okay, now I'm going to start making my shading lighter, so I'm not pressing as hard anymore. Okay, I can't get that curve comfortably, so I'm just going to turn the page so that my hand is comfortable. You'll always make better drawings or shadings if your hand is in a comfortable position. Okay, again, I'm going to just turn the page. Even though I'm doing hatching, this is coming out very smooth, and that is because I'm using a 4B, and 4Bs are very smooth pencils. You need to really make an effort to make them look a bit more rough. Okay, now in this area here, you want it really, really light, almost white. And in fact, you can leave a little spot of it white. If you find, oh, now I've done too much shading, there's not a lot of light there, just take your eraser and lighten it up. If you have decided you don't like how your hatching came out, you can turn it into smooth shading. Just use your finger and blend it. Remember, again, follow the shape. So don't just rub your finger in a straight line, or it will make the shading straight. Use the curve. So I'm doing an oval curve. I'm going to lighten it again. Okay. Objects will also cast a shadow. So you need to make a bit of a shadow, and it will be on the opposite side to the light source. Shadows you usually do with soft shading, so you could, or smooth shading, you can rub it because shadows are smooth and soft. Okay, I'm gonna just work this corner a little bit more and make it a little bit darker. The more difference you make in tone, or how dark it is, the more three-dimensional your object is going to look. The trick to drawing is press light until it's right. So keep working on a picture. Sometimes you shade over a place 3 or 4 times until it looks exactly the way that you want it to look. But if you go and press really dark in the beginning, it's hard to correct that. Rather press too lightly and go over it again, then press too dark and battle to erase it. Right, so there's our first shape done, the oval. It's definitely easier to do the smooth shading first. So if you're starting out, start with smooth shading. You can hide a lot with rubbing your finger over it. Okay, let's look at the heart next, because its shading is going to be very similar to the cylinder. The light's now coming from the left-hand side. So that means it's going to be really light in this spot here, and in this spot here. And our darkest shading is going to be down this side. Okay, again, I'm going to start with my darkest shading, and I'm going to turn the page upside down to make it easier for me to draw. I'm doing cross-hatching shading for this heart now. Cross-hatching can be a little bit tricky because sometimes you get so caught up in doing the cross-hatching you forget about the shading. So it's a couple of different things to think about all at once. A little bit of dark around the outside here. I always leave the lighter tones until last. So we're going to just do a middle tone. Tone just means how dark the shading is. Okay, now if I look at it, there's a bit too much dark shading there. I'm just going to use my eraser, rub it out, and I'd like a bit more light on this side of the heart. Pressing really lightly over these parts. So we still want it to have some texture, but you don't want to press so hard that you lose the light. We're going to do the cylinder now. So the light's almost coming from the top of the cylinder, which means this top part of the cylinder is going to be quite light. And because the light is from the left a little bit, probably also be a little bit lighter on the left-hand side of the cylinder. So start with your darker shades. Slowly make it lighter and lighter until you get to your lightest spot. Okay, I've got into my light spot now, so I'm just going to stop. Go to the other side, do a little bit of my dark shading. Okay, then use the bottom of the cylinder to help you do some shading too. The bottom of the cylinder is quite far away from the light, so it will need to be dark. And then there'll be a little bit of shading here on the lip. This right-hand side of the circle at the top will be slightly darker because it's away from the light. Again, I'm not just shading straight, I'm following the curve or following the shape of the outline. Okay, need to start getting lighter now. You'll find as you start sketching, there will be a style or technique that suits you. So I usually end up doing a mixture between hatching and scribbling. Some people prefer to do the smooth. The more you draw, the more you'll find what your
style is. Right, so in this video we had a look at the 5 types of sketching techniques: hatching, cross-hatching, blending, scribbling and stippling. And we practiced using these shading techniques on different shapes and using the shape to help us shade. If you have any questions about the techniques or how to shade, please leave me a question in the comments below and I'll be glad to help you out. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you would like to see more, please subscribe to our channel. We put a new video up every week. You can watch our next video on how to draw the Eiffel Tower, where we'll be using some of the techniques that we have learned today.